During the 2018 Universal Periodic Review, China received 346 recommendations and it supported 284 recommendations at the adoption of its UPR outcome. Of the recommendations, 4 were focused on the implementation of the guiding principles on business and human rights. Whilst the implementation of the 284 recommendations is Chinese government's primary responsibility, Chinese investment host countries, UN, and CSOs also have a role on monitoring and demanding accountability. Meanwhile, countries like Kenya have recommended that China should extend the guiding principles on business and human rights to Chinese companies operating outside China. This is against a background of various alleged human rights violations by Chinese operations in the country. Although the UPR is a state-driven exercise, non-governmental organizations and civil society actors have many opportunities to take part and influence the UPR process.
The Zimbabwe Environmental Law Association, ZELA, in conjunction with the Africa Institute for Environmental Law, brings to you the Political Economy Dialogues on Natural Resource Governance, PEDNAG. This is an ongoing series to raise awareness and advocate for the rights of communities and conservation of the environment and natural resources. Get ready to learn more about climate change, energy consumption, local service delivery governance, responsible investments, and so much more. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode.
Today, we have a good lineup of speakers that are going to speak. Today, we are really focusing on the Universal Periodic Review process. As you may be aware, the Universal Periodic Review process is a unique process whereby the United Nations member states undergo an assessment. They report on their human rights record and they are assessed, and the recommendations are made by the Human Rights Council on how, the different countries can really address emerging or key human rights issues. And going to basically share national investments and their impacts in terms of the human rights records, in particular the socio-economic and environmental and cultural rights of the affected communities. We also hope to come up with effective engagement and advocacy strategies to foster corporate accountability. In this case, we are looking at the recommendations that were made the human rights to the Chinese government and how we can advocate for effective strategies that can help to really implement those recommendations. And we are also continuing through the PEDNAG dialogue series to build an accountability network whereby together we can join hands in demanding for corporate accountability of the Chinese investors in the mining and energy sectors in Africa, whereby we interact, with the recommendations of the UPR, move beyond it becoming an exercise where the state simply goes back to really implement the recommendations coming from the Human Rights Council, but we are engaging with those recommendations and bringing them to life to make sure that they are really implemented and there is a positive change and outcome in terms of the environmental socio-economic rights of the communities that are affected by Chinese investors in the mining and energy sectors in Africa. So today, like I said, we have a range of speakers that we have that are going to share useful insights based on their experience and based on the work that they have done over so many years in terms of similar issues. And our first speaker for today is Marco. I am going to allow Marco to begin to share his screen as I introduce Marco to the audience. He's going to add on to that particular, introduction, but going to be our first speaker. Is going to share with us the Latin American perspective on these issues so that we can learn from that perspective. He is going to talk about monitoring China's business and human rights commitment from that Latin American perspective. And Marco holds a BA in sociology from a university in Bolivia and a master's degree in environment and development. And he is currently pursuing his PhD in development studies related to this, and has directed research projects on Chinese investments in Bolivia and other countries in that region. So Marco, over to you. The time is yours now.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much. I hope that you can hear me well. First of all, I'd like to thank you for the invitation to participate in this important dialogue session.
Si me permites un segundo para dar las instrucciones
I would like to give the interpretation instructions before you continue.
Sorry to interrupt. Sorry, Nirad. So just to let everyone know, that interpretation is available. You can look at the bottom of the screen. There should be like a circle or a globe interpretation. Please just pick English or your preferred language. And thank you very much for being here. It's my pleasure to let Marco take the floor. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Pedro.
Thank you so much, Pedro. So once again, like I was saying, it is a pleasure for me to be here and participate in this exchange and dialogue. This is such a relevant topic for our continent. I'd like to start thanking Pedro for inviting me. And I'd also like to thank Zela. It's important to know you and all of you who work there. And I'd also like to thank all the other panelists who are here, and also thank the interpreters. So, like it was said, I'm going to talk about this topic, giving the Latin American perspective. And I'd like to talk about some efforts that we've carried out systematically in order to implement and discuss the recommendations and commitments that China has made in business and human rights. So in Latin America, we believe that we have our own perspective. We've had different mechanisms, and we've also developed a lot of learnings in these years of work, not only in our countries, but also in the countries where the investments come from to Latin America. In particular, I will speak of China during my presentation. First of all, this is the agenda of my presentation, or the main topics that I'm going to discuss. First of all, I'd like to present my organization. I think it's very important. Secondly, I would like to express our experience with the Universal Periodic Review of the United Nations. And then I would like to talk about some of the achievements that we've had so that you can understand how we worked. And then I'd like to talk about some of the next steps. So that means, what are we thinking after everything we've already done? Okay. Well, first of all, I'd like to tell you a little bit about us. LAS, Latin American Sustainable, is an NGO from Ecuador, and it has a regional scope. We work with several countries here, accompanying, researching, advising, and developing our own Latin American perspective for this work, and I'm responsible for strengthening the skills in LAS. So it has been working for 8 years, protecting the environment and communities, especially in the context of Chinese investments. Latin America, in the last 15 years, has had a massive arrival of Chinese investment. And it has really transformed the relationships we have and also the environments in those regions. So to us, focusing on China has to do with this drastic change that we've seen in the last 15 years, like I just mentioned, and it impacts the life of everyone on the continent. We are the only organization in Latin America's sustainable that works exclusively dedicated to monitoring Chinese investments and their environmental implications. This is important for us to understand what's going on in the region. That way we can support initiatives like the ones that I will mention now. And we also work in coordination, always linked and partnered with partners in the region, like NGOs, local communities, civil society organizations. And one of our main partners is CICDHA. This is a collective group that is carrying out the UPR. I think that it's also important to briefly mention how we work. We have 4 main lines of work. One of them is research, follow-up. We also try to come up with, or we also show and try to make public the guidelines that they have in China regarding the environment. We also write letters, case studies, reports for all the stakeholders in China and the host countries receiving Chinese investments. We also follow up closely with different players, especially Chinese banks, like the Chinese Development Bank. We are now finishing a report about this bank in Latin America. The idea is to show a very important player in Latin America is a region where China has made a lot of investment, but it is still a very unknown player. So there has to be a big change in their policies. And we're also working on the Infrastructure Asian Bank. We're trying to create a regional group of Latin American organizations that dialogue with this bank, that get to know what fundings are being planned for the region. Several countries are partners of the bank, and they will receive funding.
So to receive investments in infrastructure. And on the other hand, we work a lot with human rights processes as connected to the Universal Declaration of China in 2018, and working with associations in the region so we can develop a cultural process that I will elaborate. And we are working on that to follow up the implementation of the recommendations made to China. And on the other hand, also in the human rights process, we work with social, environmental, and cultural rights in the region, the ESCRs, and we continue in this process with China, seeking at least the implementation of human rights in Latin America feasible. So this is part of the effort we carry out since 2018, the UPR, China's UPR of 2018, and all the work carried out after it up to 2019. It was a very intense campaign, and this slogan has to do with making the voice of the communities in Latin America that are impacted in their human rights due to the Chinese investments have to be heard. So we have driven efforts to 21 organizations from civil society in Argentina, Brazil, Bolivia, Ecuador, to help us in a deep investigation of what is going on with Chinese investments in certain milestone projects that they finance and they build in Latin America. So this effort of getting together and investigating, we concluded with a final report considering 18 major Chinese projects in these 5 countries. 18 projects, a lot of them related to mining. Many of the projects that we developed since 2018 has to do with mining, major infrastructures, energy production, building of major water power plants. And to summarize of what we achieved and what we were able to disclose with the investigation, we have a systematic follow-up of the patterns of breaking human rights and human rights treaties. One of the most important rights that we have to guarantee, and it is violated in China, is the participation and consultation. Something very clear that the presence of this project where we have original people dwellings, including indigenous populations that are isolated with no contact with other humans, extremely isolated populations. So expansion to territory and adequate housing. We see many problems in to the life and integrity of these populations in their environmental, social, cultural rights, impact on environment, because they are located, these projects are located in very sensitive areas. So it is very important to follow this up. And labor rights and association rights. To give you a dimension of what we identified that in our review, 3 major sectors: mining, oil industry, and carbon industry, hydrocarbon industry, and water. These three projects are impacting protected, environmentally protected areas, UNESCO historic legacy heritage areas, and vulnerable areas with a major interference in the indigenous rights. And many of them are located in the Amazon, which is extremely important environmental biome. So what did we achieve with the process, with the UPR? This was a Herculean job. We effort in different levels. This was not only made to the United Nations, but to be disclosed and be part of the discussions made by the states in the evaluation of extraterritorial Chinese presence. So in this process, the most important achievements has to do with the context. First, we produced recommendations about this extraterritorial exploitation and their obligations. So China should recognize the problem and recognize their obligations to operate as they operate in their home country. This sometimes is not mentioned. They have extraterritorial obligations, they have human rights, and this is not fully established. This is being promoted by the pressure of civil society organizations, for instance, the effort we carried out among the 5 countries. So it is very important to analyze this extraterritorial presence. Second, relevant recommendations were sent to China and they accepted it. They accepted key recommendations and they promised to consider them in their activities. We also made visible problems in all instances and all spheres of work. These projects that are being executed, they violate human rights, and being displaced to other areas will not solve the problem and present results at country level. So in the UPR for Chinese stakeholders and our country stakeholders develop common recommendations. About the first element that I mentioned of extraterritorial recommendations on the rise in China UPRs, this is a table about these recommendations. These are the last reviews. Since 2009 in China, they had 3 UPRs carried out. And in 2018, when we took part, 20 UPRs 20 related to international projects from China. Related to global environmental issues, in 2009, there was no recommendations, and in 2018, 8 recommendations. This proves the work of the NGO work that is increasing and putting in the agenda of the discussion human rights, especially related to Chinese companies and projects. It's also very important to consider the quality of recommendations made to China. We highlight this here, among others, because we consider impact, and we worked in Geneva and other states about the impact in our region, from countries as Ecuador that want to reduce Chinese investment. For instance, Ecuador recommended to promote measures to ensure that development and infrastructure projects inside and outside the territory are fully consistent to human rights, respect environment, and sustainability of natural resources, in line with all applicable national and international law and commitments of 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And in Peru, to consider the establishment of legal framework to guarantee that the activities carried out by industries do not neglect human rights. And the other countries also incorporating international conventions on ESCRs, including states like Palestine, Haiti, Fiji, Democratic Republic of Congo, Kenya. And these are not just simple achievements. They are very important. So the countries receiving Chinese investments have to be very careful and have to be very much in line with this. What is also very important is consider the impacts. We also carried out a survey, 9 months of in countries and in UN level, country level, in UN level, like Ecuador, working with multiple sectors, for instance, embassies that are more sensitive to the human rights, countries in the region, to know the problems we are facing. And so they are open to the recommendations made by the United Nations. We work hard in Geneva with more than 20 permanent missions that produce reports and take part in meetings, so they understand the need to make these recommendations to China. And then a very strong work in the countries. So the Chinese embassies in these countries and the governments of the countries receiving investment pay attention to these recommendations. This has a strong influence, and it is important to understand how these mechanisms work to and use the participation of civil society. To China, after that, after knowing the results, we sent a report and several letters, at least 4 to 14 Chinese institutions that are key for the approval, supervision, and execution of investments in foreign countries. They received our letters to know the recommendation and the problems we are facing and in their projects with human rights violation and that require urgent action from China. And for the UN Human Rights Commission, we sent a report to China, to the National Bank Association, to the Chinese International Contractors Association, China Chamber of Commerce of Metals, Minerals, and Chemicals, importers and exporters. So a strong work. And so China is aware of our concern and about the problems. And we know from good sources that this report was translated into Chinese, was shared with high authorities, and the letters that we sent to institutions and to Chinese institutions and companies and in embassies were also translated and received extra officially. So we know that this report that we started had a receival in China, was well received in China and considered in China. And finally, we developed very strong work nationally and internationally. At the end of the process, we had more than 90 interviews and press releases, published in this report. This is something that was not just in United Nations level. We want this to be disclosed and promoted in national and international media. I have to say that we carried out a major effort and to communicate our concerns in our countries. All of that was permanently promoted in each country. We had press releases and press conferences in each of the countries, and we expect that China is it takes responsibility for their investments in foreign countries with control and supervision about human rights and ESCRs. Some of the main learnings of our work. That is a continuous work. It is not concluded. We are still on the fight. We are still working in this mechanism. But what are the learnings? First, UPR is becoming a space where we understand the response and recognize the responsibilities of extraterritorial action. These are not mandatory. These are not binding, but it is a very important space to recognize extraterritorial responsibilities. And so civil society should promote it. The United Nations Human Rights Council is a place where this can be, where denounces can be made and heard and processed through the UPR work with the same documentation that we have with the cases. Specific cases that are severe severe breach of human rights that should be taken to this council to take them to the companies and to the government. Another learning is that UPR is a space where China cannot ignore the civil society organizations. Before UPRs, we already had huge efforts to communicate, to establish a dialogue with Chinese entities. Unfortunately, this is extremely difficult. Chinese companies and authorities do not have a culture of dialogue with civil society. Still, they have very little culture for this dialogue. So we have to use the UPRs so that they cannot ignore us. They are obliged to recognize their responsibility, their accountability. And our work is not finished, is not concluded, for no means. It must be felt and visible in many different levels. For instance, in regional instance for human rights in Latin America and other international forum where we have a dialogue with civil society. And finally, I believe that I can highlight that impacts that we can achieve as civil society depend on close collaboration in different levels, local, regional, and international, with the organizations that are affected, with the civil society organizations, in the regional level, with organizations such as ours, that has this possibility of gathering regional efforts and take it to a higher sphere when local sphere is not responding, and also international level. It's also very important to take into consideration the support of international entities and authorities with so much knowledge and so many opportunities. For us was extremely important because it allowed us to identify and work better with some experts about extraterritorial responsibilities of China. And likewise, we work with other organizations like the International Federation of Human Rights, International Services for Human Rights, due to their expertise in human rights mechanisms and their expertise in to serve for this process. So all these learnings are extremely important, and now we are producing after the last UPR. We've been working, and we are in the midterm of a new UPR with China that we want to document if China implemented or not the recommendations that were presented in the previous UPR. So November 23, we will have a launch event where we can send you all the information. We would like very much if you could also take part, all the organizations in other regions that are interested in taking part. We will present, this will also have simultaneous translation, and at that moment we will present the new report where we documented 24 cases from 8 countries, so more cases and more countries than 2018 report. So now we have Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, Mexico, Peru, and Venezuela. And in this process, we evidenced and we believe that some of the recommendations were implemented. We added other sectors. Now we have 4.
And we see that the issues remain, the issues that we identified before, they remain. And sometimes it's the same projects or even new projects. So the same trends are seen. For example, there are issues with environmental rights. There are issues with indigenous peoples, especially the prior consultation. There are also issues with labor rights. There are also issues with violence. There are also a lot of environments affected, like fragile or weaker ecosystems like the Amazon and other areas. We've been identifying these issues, and what we see is that the recommendations from the UPR before were not implemented. The recommendations can't just be recommendations. These are documents that are issued, and they have to be implemented in terms of funding. We have to have, for example, clauses in the contract to protect people, protect their human rights, and also clauses with the Chinese companies with direct mechanisms, with direct clauses. That's why I want to show you some of the recommendations that we've been working on. These are just 4. We have a lot more, but these are the 4 ones that I wanted to show you. We also have recommendations for Chinese companies, Chinese investors, and for the states in Latin America. For example, one of the recommendations is that China must use mandatory laws and regulations already in place to build binding commitments to responsible business conduct. We have recommendations for national action plan and development to guide legislation for Chinese companies to carry out human rights and environmental due diligence, and also strengthen judicial and extrajudicial mechanisms. We want to also come up with best practices and, like I said, pass legislation for Chinese companies and strengthen the judicial and extrajudicial mechanisms. This will help provide effective redress against business-related abuses for defenders and affected communities. So like I said, we have some recommendations that are for companies, other for investors, other for financing companies. Well, I believe my time is up. So I just wanted to tell you that in Latin America, we want to prepare a report for 2023. We want to have all the different stakeholders involved, civil society, to be able to develop this proper global report and try to implement these recommendations. Okay, well, that's what I wanted to tell you. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Marco, for that interesting presentation and really showing us the amount of real advocacy work that we need to do together to push for implementation of recommendations. And really, you know, that call to action that let's submit a global report together. I'm going to allow for colleagues to share questions from the floor. Any questions directly to Marco? We have time to take maybe 2 or 3 questions from the floor before we then proceed to our next speaker. I am not able to see any hands. There is a hand from Obed, and there's also Alessandra. So let's hear from Obed.
Right. Thank you very much, Nyari. And thank you, Marco, for the presentation. It was very insightful. I just wanted you to speak a bit about some of the lessons and challenges that your organization faced as you engaged the Chinese government, and also the challenges and lessons from the UN level engagements that you had. What are those lessons that you think could be of importance and significance to some NGOs, particularly in Zimbabwe, who would also want to make use of the UN or UPR process for it to be a success? Thank you.
Thanks, Obed. I'm going to allow Alessandra to also come in now. Alessandra, are you there?
Sorry, I was having a problem with my mute button. My question was actually very similar to Obert's, and also asking, do you think, given China's recent pronouncements, that you will begin to see a more cooperative side, or do you think they're just shifting tactics?
Thank you, Alessandra. So let me allow Marco to respond to these two questions. Darlington, if you can hear us, maybe you can type in your message in the chat. Oh, Darlington indicates that he is muted. Host, can you unmute him?
Yeah, sure.
Darlington, over to you.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and thanks to the first presenter. I think my question is with regards to holding the companies to account. The biggest lesson or the biggest challenge that we have had in Zimbabwe is how we can hold these companies to account. Because most of them here in Zimbabwe, we try to check their registration as companies or their offices. It's usually shared. You don't get anything, or you struggle to get that information. How has it been for you? The what makes it easy for you? Thank you.
Thank you, Darlington. Marco, please go ahead with the responses.
Thank you so much for your question. It's very, very interesting. Well, first of all, about our organization, we focus on China. So one of the main challenges that we see, having worked for 20 years with other players and investors in the country and in the region, for example, North Americans or Europeans or people from other regions, we have a huge issue with the Chinese government. It's a challenge, and it has to do with the lack of responses to the civil society. I mean, we have a huge challenge there because what's hardest for us, the biggest challenge, is for China to respond openly. China needs to accept dialogue and receive the communication from civil society and do its due diligence. They have to do preventive work. So not only respond to claims, but also anticipate to issues that can happen with investments. I mean, all investments have a series of issues, and even more if they're in areas that are environmentally sensitive, let's say, or where there are vulnerable populations like indigenous people. So they have to pay attention to the warnings that the civil society sends. And that's what most of our issues have to do. They don't have a proper due diligence. They don't pay attention to the society that they're impacting. So that's why there are so many issues. Regarding the UPR process, I think there are a lot of challenges. First of all, I would say that this work requires a lot of effort. And it requires a lot of effort because you have to know the UN, you have to know the mechanism, you have to know how the mechanism adapts, and it doesn't really adapt. I mean, it's not it doesn't quickly adapt culturally to people from other regions like Latin America, for example. So we do have to carry out this huge work to be able to articulate the efforts of organizations. the larger the coalitions and the groups, the better, because that way you can actually transmit or convey the strength of the civil society towards these mechanisms. And then we also have to develop a systematic process. We have to work in an anticipated manner. I mean, we're talking about 2023, and there's a lot of, I mean, we still have 2 years, but we have to be prepared. We have to document the cases that we want to present as evidence of human rights violations. We also have to try to understand what these cases are telling us at a human rights level. So there are all these challenges, and these challenges sometimes are frustrating, and they frustrate a lot of organizations because, I mean, these are efforts that have very little results. That's why I like to focus on the lessons learned and results, and the results are extremely interesting. I mean, China is not completely closed off. I mean, it recognizes its obligations in the UN. It understands the concerns. It doesn't treat them as just an issue that they have with the United States. I mean, our own state that accept these investments, I mean, they receive a lot of money from China, and we need them to make these observations. China sees that this issue is not just political, that behind it, there are actual facts, and these facts are showing what needs to be improved. And Alessandra's question, very interesting. I mean, we've asked ourselves the same thing. Is it worth it at the end of the day? And I do believe that it's worth it at the end of the day, because for the new report that we're coming up with, I've had to document what is going on in China, what China is doing to respond and improve its commitments or implement some of its obligations. And it's not like China didn't do anything. We're talking about all the issues, but yes, the regulations commissions for banks in China has issued some new guidelines. In some cases, they've shown that they've understood certain concepts that have to do with these extraterritorial obligations that they have to take on. So some new guidelines are in the minds of Chinese investors who are abroad. So they know that they do have to participate in certain policies or generate these policies in order to, I think a lot of these guidelines will have an impact.
Thank you, Marco, for that. So really key points there around a strong civil society coming together so that the voice of civil society cannot be ignored. And I think the recommendation there that we come together with a global report is key. And again, a key issue of setting up smart partnerships. I think Marco spoke about the work that they did working with, country missions in Geneva, and really constantly raising visibility of the issues everywhere at all levels. I think those are the key recommendations. And I think I like the point that Marco made, that it is not easy, getting that kind of accountability, but, we can also really target specific investor groups, target specific, Chinese, embassies, the embassy here in Zimbabwe, calling upon them to really drive a process of coming up with all these guidelines and laws to govern investors so that we can really make some positive progress. So thank you so much, Marco, for that. I saw one last hand from Billion. Billion, maybe you can put your question in the chat, or we can park your question for now because we have to move on to the next speaker, Dr. James Tabora. Dr. Tabora is a senior research consultant in human rights and democratic governance, constitutionalism, rule of law, and natural resource governance. He has consulted for various local, regional, and international civil society, non-governmental organizations in these areas, and he's a senior lecturer of law at the Faculty of Law at the University of Zimbabwe. So, Dr. Tabora, I'm handing over the time.
Thank you very much, Nyaradzo. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear,
Yes.
Dr. Tabora.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I want to say that I'm honored to speak today before you. I can see some usual suspects, colleagues and friends in the profession and also in the civil society. So without wasting time, I would really like to acknowledge the presentation by Marco earlier on. He raised the very critical issues that are very practical, not only in relation to his country, but we can also share those experiences as Zimbabweans. And we can also agree that some of the happenings that he was talking about are characteristic of what is happening in other African countries like Zambia, Malawi, DRC, where the presence of Chinese investors have been recorded. So today I was given the topic, maximizing the use of the UPR system at country level to hold governments accountable. Tips for non-state actors. So I defined the non-state actors to generally mean civil society organizations and the other actors that have got a similar jacket or that wear a similar jacket, but that are not state institutions. I also understood the topic to want me to say, how can civil society, how can non-state actors make maximum use of the universal periodic review system at country level to hold their government accountable to the actions of that government or to the actions of foreign companies that will have set foot in that country. So how can we hold the Zimbabwean government accountable for the actions of Chinese companies? And also, how can we hold the Chinese government accountable for the actions of Chinese companies in Zimbabwe in relation to human rights violations, but using the UPR system? So I'm not going to focus on other channels or other routes, but basically how we can make use as non-state actors of the UPR system, only the UPR system, which is a unique system. So just to highlight a bit about the UPR or the Universal Periodic Review Mechanism, for those that do not know it or for those that are confused with what it is a process. It is a unique process which involves a review of the human rights records of all United Nations member states. So all countries, 193 countries, almost all countries in the world are members of the UN system of the United Nations, right? So the UN has got several systems of monitoring performance of human rights. Nowadays, since the 1990s or 1980s, you can say, the UN has accepted human rights as a huge agenda in its affairs. So human rights is a very huge agenda in the UN system. So the UPR system is a process to review how are countries performing in terms of human rights. How are they accepting and implementing obligations? How are they enforcing obligations? How are they protecting their people from human rights violations by themselves, by other institutions, and also by foreign entities? So the UPR system, because it is nestled within the UN system, it is state-driven. It is a process that is driven by states. Why states? Because the UN is an organization of states, not of civil society organizations, not of companies, not of people, of individual people, but of states. So it is states that drive the UPR system, whereby they go there in front of other states, they present what they have done throughout the year in relation to human rights, what laws they have passed, what mechanisms they have adopted to respect, promote, and fulfill human rights. And they can also report on how those states have complied with the comments about human rights that were passed in the previous year. So after every presentation by a state of its human rights, other countries can comment to say, no, you are ignoring this aspect. Can you focus on this aspect next time? You are ignoring this aspect. Can you do further actions? So the states, it's only states who sit down and assess each other. So it's a UPR system. It's a review. It reviews human rights records of states and how states are implementing and giving effect to human rights obligations that they would on themselves promised to respect, or that they would have been encouraged to address by other states. So states are obliged to declare what action they have taken to improve the human rights situations in their countries, and the UPR provides the opportunity for states to fulfill their human rights. So states can fulfill their human rights through state bodies or state agencies, but also through non-state actors. So where then do non-state actors come? I have said that the UPR system is a system whereby it's a state-driven system. It is states that drive the system. It is states that are being assessed by other states. So what is the nature of the review that takes place? First of all, there's a national report that is prepared by the state under review. What we mean by this is that every year, the government of Zimbabwe produces a national report to say throughout it, between 2020 and 2021, these are the human rights issues that we have addressed. These are the human rights issues we have faced. These are the human rights responses we have made. These are the human rights policies we have made. These are the human rights laws we have passed. Human rights actions we have given effect to. Human rights mechanisms, procedures we have. So that is a report that is prepared by the government, right? So it touches on all things. It's usually prepared by the Minister of Justice, and then he presents it in Geneva every year. Then the second thing, there's also a compilation of the United Nations information on the state under review, prepared by the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. So an agency of the UN also prepares information on this state. So this agency, this UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, prepares also its own report based on information that it has on Zimbabwe or on any other country that is part of the UPR system. Then thirdly, there's also a summary of information that is submitted by other stakeholders concerning that country's human rights record. And these other stakeholders include civil society actors, national human rights institutions. In Zimbabwe, you've got the Zimbabwe Human Rights Commission, and regional organizations. This summary is prepared by the Office of the Human Rights Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, but based on information from these actors. So these actors are non-state actors. I want you to focus on what is called the civil society actors. This is where I want you to focus on, because it's us now. How can the civil society actors maximize this space? So the UPR system provides a space for CSOs to submit their own information about Zimbabwe, to say, in Zimbabwe, we have these human rights issues. In Zimbabwe, last year, Zimbabwe was encouraged to address these human rights issues, but it has failed to do that, or it has done A, B, C, D, and not done E, F, G. Zimbabwe was encouraged to pass laws to compel Chinese companies to respect labor laws. But up to now, there are no such laws that have been that have been passed or promulgated. So civil society actors they are part of the UPR system. They can participate in the UPR system. They are accommodated. They have that space. How big that space is open for debate, but it's a space that we must never ignore as civil society organizations. So on accountability, which governments can we focus on? Which governments must be held accountable? So there are many issues there are many ways of trying to navigate this question. First of all, the human rights obligations, or the human rights record that is at stake here, is the human rights record of that state, which is of Zimbabwe. So Zimbabwe publishes or submits its national human rights records to the Human Rights Council. So that human rights record, that report, tells us of the obligations of the Zimbabwean government on human rights. So the government that is accountable in that space is the Zimbabwean government. So the question that will be asked is, how have you, as the Zimbabwean government, performed in terms of human rights? What obligations have you implemented? Have you enforced? Have you met? Have you given effect to? Right. So first of all, the government that is hosting the Chinese investment is the government that must be held accountable. So if it is the Zambian government, it is the one that should say, these are the laws we have put in place to ensure Chinese investment does not violate human rights. Right. Then also the Chinese government, right? The report itself, we will not really focus on the Chinese government, but the Chinese government has its own time to be questioned and to also produce its own report. So that report by the Chinese government to the Human Rights Council also talks about how China has implemented those obligations. So the accountability question will focus on how accountable has China been to the human rights expectations and the comments and observations that have been made by civil society organizations and other stakeholders in the UPR system. So accountability also at a local level. The other question to ask is, how is the Zimbabwean government ensure the accountability at the company level? How are Chinese companies regulated? What obligations have been enforced on them? What kind of laws and policies have been passed to ensure that they do not violate human rights? How has the government addressed human rights violations and complaints by Chinese companies at a very local level? Those companies in the diamond mining sector, in the granite mining sector, in infrastructure development, in other sectors, national governance, right? How has the government performed in that area? So this is the nature of accountability that would be under question. So from a general reading of the Human Rights Council report on China, so the Human Rights Council produced a report on China to say what has CSOs and other non-state actors said about China, about the activities of Chinese companies in certain countries, right? So there's this accusation or this allegation by a CSO to say that Chinese companies in Ecuador have been engaged in irregular land acquisition practices, arbitrary claims of mining rights, filing civil actions against families without property titles, of course, to evict them, right? So this is behavior we have seen in Zimbabwe. The Chinese companies are there in the mining zones. There's eviction, there's forcible relocation, there's no compensation of communities that host Chinese mining investments. The government has not protected those communities at all. The government has not put in place a law with the compensation guidelines, a law with eviction guidelines, a law with consultation guidelines, right? A law with that can take into account, that creates a platform of dialogue between Chinese companies. So this is an example of Chinese violations in Ecuador, where Marco was talking about. The Human Rights Council has also observed that China has failed to establish an independent national human rights institution with a wide mandate to protect and promote women's rights and also children's rights. So this is an observation by the Council, but it was actually made by the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women and the Committee on the Rights of the Child. So China, what this means is that China has no human rights commission that we have, such as our Zimbabwe Human Rights Commission. It's a complaint, it's an observation, it's a finding that was made. As a result, CSOs can play into this, right? Non-state actors in women and children's rights can center their advocacy. On this point alone, it's a huge point. If you don't have a national human rights institution, right? How then are you enforcing and protecting women's rights? How then are you enforcing and protecting children's rights? So it's an observation that was made also against China. Then we come to the UPR mechanism and its inclusive approach. So I have given you a brief landscape or scope of what is the UPR system. But in general, the UPR opens up spaces at the national level for collaboration between governments and national human rights institutions. So it's a system that accommodates CSOs. It's a system that accommodates the national human rights institution. It's a system that accommodates parliament. It's a system that accommodates other stakeholders. So the UPR system is these spaces. Non-state actors must understand these spaces so that they can maximize them. They can use these spaces to submit reports, to engage with the national human rights institution. There's nothing wrong with the Zimbabwe Human Rights Committee, with any Zimbabwean non-governmental organization or CSO engaging with the National Human Rights Commission that we have, the ZHRC, in the context of the UPR mechanisms. How can we present a joint report on Zimbabwe's human rights performance, right? So the CSOs can also partner with parliaments to say, we want to present a report to support parliament in this report that will eventually find its way to the Human Rights Council and also other stakeholders, usually non-state stakeholders, right? So this collaboration between several non-state actors, it contributes to human rights accountability. Once we have got several non-state actors that are included in the UPR mechanisms, we enhance human rights accountability, we enhance human rights education, we enhance the monitoring capabilities of individual CSOs. So once CSOs network and partner together in the context of the UPR to contribute to that national report that is submitted to the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights, or that is submitted by the state, or that is submitted by the UN Information Office, then the monitoring capabilities of CSOs or of non-state organizations is enhanced. It also enhances awareness of the UPR mechanisms. Once there are many bodies that are involved in one process, then there is more awareness, right, of that process at a national level, right? So this collaboration, so I wrote these collaborations between different national actors around the UPR promote the realization of human rights at the national level, right? So what roles can non-state actors and CSOs play? Right. I want to say that this topic that we are discussing today is a topic within what is called global governance, right? It's a topic about global governance in general. What role can CSOs play in global governance, global policy making, global law making, global policy implementation, global law, international law implementation, right? So there are several roles that CSOs can play within the context of the UPR. The first one is agenda setting. Yeah, right. So CSOs can set the agenda. Zimbabwean CSOs can set the agenda for human rights debate within the UPR system. They can say, no, all these years, the government have submitted the reports, human rights reports to the Human Rights Council under the UPR system. But those reports have totally ignored the rights of communities affected by mining companies. We want this topic to find its way in the report. So by non-state actors insisting on that issue means that they have set the agenda. Non-state actors can say, no, the Zimbabwe government has ignored this specific human rights issue, be it labor issue in Chinese companies, be it rights of children or child labor issues, be it women exploitation or underemployment or lower wages being paid by Chinese. So they can set the human rights agenda. That must eventually find its way in the UPR report. They can also contribute in international lawmaking, right? CSOs can contribute to domestic lawmaking. They can submit model laws. They can submit legal proposals. They can also do this to say, internationally, there's a gap. We need a treaty that creates guidelines for multinational companies operating in globally, operating in Zimbabwe, in Africa, Southern Africa, West Africa. So they can determine the content of the law. They can also contribute to the making of the law. They can also undertake what is called transnational diplomacy, whereby they network together to put and exert pressure on a particular government or on a particular human rights violation that is at a regional scale or at a transnational scale. Let's say there's a lot of child trafficking that is in Southern Africa. CSOs can say, okay, we want to engage all Southern African governments so that they can address child trafficking. So they can undertake what is called transnational diplomacy, whereby they coalesce around one issue and then raise their voice. CSOs can coalesce around the activities of Chinese companies and the lack of a Chinese law with extraterritorial jurisdiction. Other roles include helping in the implementation of the law or monitoring of global issues, including poverty reduction, democratic governance, development, and other issues. They can also act as advocates for policy solutions. What are the solutions to this problem? Service providers, knowledge brokers, or simply as watchdogs and the monitors of state and intergovernmental actions within the UPR process, right? So those are my submissions on the actual role. But also I want to say that networks are critical for non-state actors if they want to work within the UPR system. They must create networks. the more the networks, the more solid the networks or the coalitions is, the more solid the voice. So if there are more networks that can submit, that can consolidate one report, they can then submit that one report within the context of the UPR to say, all NGOs in Zimbabwe have submitted this report about Zimbabwe's human rights performance. So the more the NGOs involved, the more believable, credible that report is, and the more impactful it is. They can also, CSOs and transnational non-state actors can also play a major role in aggregating social forces in the development of common identities to say we are human rights organizations, these are our aspirations, this is what we fight for. In terms of the UPR, we wanted this subject of minority rights, for example, to be realized and to be discussed and addressed at international level, right? They can also conduct advocacy with the government. It's a space that must be said, to say, non-state actors can say, yes, we have a UPR system. Let's now engage government departments in Zimbabwe so that we can conduct advocacy with them to ensure government broadly consult important stakeholders before it creates the report, before it prepares the report or in the preparation of the report. Non-state actors can say, all minority groups must be consulted. So they can conduct advocacy with the government to say, government, you must consult all these groups, all these bodies, all these institutions in the preparation of the UPR report. Then they can also maintain an open dialogue with the relevant government ministries, right? CSOs can say, Ministry of Justice, we want to create dialogue, we want to open dialogue with you concerning the UPR report. How are you addressing the issue of linguistic minorities? How are you addressing the issue of child labor? How are you addressing the issue of women exploitation in Chinese companies? So there's that space that must be taken into account by non-state actors, right? They can thus provide, what I'm trying to say throughout is that non-state actors like CSOs can thus provide inputs to activities undertaken by UN country teams. UN has got its own country teams in Zimbabwe, and these teams collect information. So they create a Zimbabwean information profile. So the information that is used by the UN to create a profile for Zimbabwe is collected by UN country teams. CSOs can provide inputs into that information, into the gathering of that data to say, this is our contribution to the creation of the Zimbabwean profile, right? By so doing, CSOs can encourage linkages between the implementation of UPR recommendations and the pursuit by states of SDGs. Not only SDGs, other policies. So once you engage government, you can say, government, we are engaging you within the context of the UPR, but we also want you to connect your pursuit of this human rights issue to the other issues in SDG or to other policy issues that you have always been pursuing, right? CSO can also push development of consolidated national action plans on human rights, right? Every government is required to have national action plans under the UN guidelines on business and human rights. National action plans are plans that says what are the actions that must be done by the Zimbabwean government concerning the business activities of multinational companies from China and other countries. Currently, we do not have a national action plan. Zela did several seminars, several meetings, including with the Zimbabwe Human Rights Commission, on the development of national action plans. So CSOs must input into the development of a national action plan so that the national action plan clearly outlines the key human rights themes that must be addressed. If the themes are the themes to talk about the lack of Chinese laws or the lack of laws to regulate Chinese companies, let it talk about it. But we need consolidated national action plans in the context of the UPR. So these are other steps that non-state actors may take. They can also create platforms for dialogue between Chinese government and domestic, regional, and international human rights institutions. Can non-state actors create a platform for conversation between Chinese companies, right, and the Human Rights Commission, or Chinese government officials, Chinese companies, and the Zimbabwean law enforcement agencies? Encourage China also to establish a national human rights institution, such as the Zimbabwe Human Rights Commission. CSOs can do that, but at an international level, we can also urge China to pass laws with extraterritorial application to regulate its companies operating in other parts of the world, right? So this is another example that I wanted to talk about on Chinese companies. I think I'll skip that because of time. But why are we focusing on the UPR system within the Human Rights Council, right? Like Yarazo have said, it is a unique process. There's no other process like that.
Very interesting insights there, beginning with the levels of accountability, how in this case, the Zimbabwean government itself is the responsibility to promote the human rights and is also accountable when it comes to protection of human rights and the performance of human rights by the corporations, in particular, in this case, the Chinese corporations that are operating in the mining and energy sectors in Zimbabwe. And, useful insights about the role of civil society organizations, again, issues of creating collaborations, coming together as civil society with joint reports, really increasing visibility of the human rights issues and really documenting the human rights situation and working with, UN country, in-country team members, and then linking that up with the rest of the other CSOs and UN actors outside the country. So maybe we can have some reflections on the presentation instead of questions, maybe 2 or so reflections, and then we'll move to Dr. Prolific, who can also prepare for his presentation now. He's going to be our final speaker. Any reflections on Dr. Tabora's presentation? There is Malvin. He indicated that we need to look at our laws and policies to see how human rights violations are being documented within our own countries. We still have colonial laws. And these laws support the elites, and we have governments that are really complicit in the human rights violations. An example is given there of Wange, where the extraction of resources is leading even to death of mining of people living in that particular area. Just to comment that this is a well-articulated presentation, and the recommendations would really help civil society in pushing for responsible mining practices by the Chinese investors in the mining and energy sectors. Allow me to move to our third and final speaker for this PEDNAG dialogue series. This is Dr. Prolific Mataruse. Dr. Mataruse is a researcher and an academic practitioner based at the University of Zimbabwe, the Department of Governance and Public Management, and his research interests are in the African political economy, decolonial theory, and community organizing. So over to you, Dr. Prolific Mataruse.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nari. And I want to thank the previous presenters for doing a wonderful job on the Universal Periodic Review and the opportunities that lie for countries and communities, which is my focus. So my presentation is titled Promotion of Community Engagement on Human Rights, Due Diligence in Mining and Renewable Energy Sector in Zimbabwe. So unfortunately, I can't share my PowerPoint presentation because of a power cut in my part of Zimbabwe, and I'm sure every Zimbabwean has come to witness the reality of power cuts of late. But it's also not a Zimbabwean situation alone. It's a problem that's also affecting South Africa and most countries in Southern Africa. So I use that as an inlet into my discussion as well, because Southern African countries have come up with something which is called the Batoka Gorge Project, where they are thinking that if we pool our resources together, we might have a company from China and the General Electric from America combining in what has been termed Batoka Gorge Project, which is an energy project that has got important energy ramifications for the region. But also it has got important ramifications for the community that lives along the Zambezi River. And the communities have been fighting for consideration. Communities who are actually across the riparian states of Zimbabwe and Zambia, amongst the 8 other riparian states that share the Zambezi River. So it's something that I think helps us understand why such a discussion is very important. The energy problems in Southern Africa are very real. The poverty problems also are very real. But what is needed, what we're talking about, is that in the pursuit of efforts to rectify that it be done responsibly, with respect for communities, with respect for people that have lived in areas, with respect for people that live on some of the geographical features that are in their areas. So I'll address a few things about energy and about mining. I'll just highlight some few projects that people can keep in mind. But just a bit of reflection on the discussion that was happening on the Universal Periodic Review. The Universal Periodic Review is a creature of the United Nations. Is by nature a political process. Both Marco and James actually highlighted how states are very key and pivotal. But I like the optimism that they have, that there is still room for civil society actors, and in my case, for communities to actually play a role. Because whilst the states can manipulate, and this is the thing that has been the problem with the UPR, states can manipulate, states can present politically correct reports, and the collegiality among states can prevent adverse reports and adverse things from being addressed. But what is really important for me that's coming out is the importance of evidence. Incontrovertible evidence that leaves no doubt. That's the thing that needs to be there. Overwhelming evidence. It has to be splashed. It has to be put out there. How then do you put out that kind of evidence? That's the challenge now. That's the challenge, and I think I will try to address some of the things. The UPR itself is an interesting conversation. The 3 processes that they highlighted, from the preparation for the review, then the review itself of the adoption, and then the implementation of recommendations. And we've heard from Marco that generally the recommendations have been ignored. So how do we stop that from being in academic practices? How do we stop that from just being a platform for speaking, to making sure that communities and people that really need the kind of assistance we're talking about are heard, and that they are understood, and ultimately that whatever their grievance, there is impact. It's actually the change is actually implemented. So it's important that first people are heard, and secondly that they are understood, and that the impact is actually realized from whatever submissions and whatever finding will be coming from the communities. So those are some very, very interesting things. But you find current investments. So the risk now, is to just focus on China, because we are focusing on China. But my topic gives me some flexibility to talk about about other countries, because it's not just focusing on China. And definitely the kind of mining that's happening in communities is not just focused on China. So maybe I'll start with an example that's very well known about the Royal Danish Library, the Royal Danish Library in Denmark, in Copenhagen, which is constructed from coal that came from Mutoko, which is a rural area in Zimbabwe. You find that the council, the Mutoko Council, Rural District Council, got about 3.5, and the library is worth millions. Just that kind of disparity speaks a lot about our investment flows, speaks a lot about the community's level of understanding in terms of the value of minerals, the value of things that are happening in the communities, the value chains that are there. And it's important to just keep that in mind. There are important developments in Zimbabwe, and we've come up with a handbook with Zela that speaks to Chinese investments in diamond, in chrome, in gold. But we have to keep in mind that Zimbabwe has over 60 minerals. And unlike other African countries that usually have, that depend on a single mineral, Zimbabwe's mineral sector is actually very, very diversified. It's got many minerals and many companies, big companies and small companies, and also individuals, small scale miners. And what we have generally observed is that lack of respect, absolute lack of respect of land tenure issues, lack of respect of property rights, where people's homes, people's properties are violated by miners of whatever origin. And this has happened many times. But then one of the meetings that we attended last year, I remember someone said there is a perception. Then someone from a particular community stood up and said, no, this is not a perception. It's actually a reality. It's actually a reality for my community. So once we are talking about the UPR and saying the UN process is a political process, the question that will be asked is whose reality are you talking about? It sounds like a political question, like a philosophical question even, but it's a question that so far the history of the UPR since its foundation in 2006 has shown that governments almost get away with anything simply by saying that, well, what kind of reality are you talking about? Whose reality are you talking about? Because there is no evidence. But it is only in circumstances where we see that evidence has been put forward persistently and seriously that you find the UPR process has actually made significant progress. And I think this is the thing that I'm picking in the mineral sector, in the mine sector in Zimbabwe, that we need to continuously be highlighting some of these things. So I don't want to preempt my other points that I'll highlight in terms of some few strategies that the communities can focus on. So also moving to the energy aspects, you find there are significant projects in the context of Zimbabwe in terms of hydro energy and coal power and solar power. By the virtue of the nature of Zimbabwean political economy arrangements, you find it's the Chinese that have most investments, most of them problematic investments in terms of how they were awarded, and also in general in the larger scope of discussions of economic restrictions against Zimbabwe. So it's when you talk about energy in Zimbabwe, you are by default talking about Chinese investments because they are so significant. You find them over 12 billion in terms of investments. You find these in hydropower. You find them in solar, and you find them in coal-fired projects. So it's also interesting once you talk about coal-fired projects. looking at President Xi Jinping's announcement at the UN General Assembly that China is no longer going to fund coal-fired projects. And the key questions that still remain is that will not clarified and that are still to be clarified is did he refer to projects that to new projects, or did he refer to projects that are already being funded? So it remains something to be seen. But you find in terms of these energy projects, there have been serious problems that have affected the communities that were concerned, like in terms of coal power, where communities have talked about pollution, and also communities have talked about human-wildlife conflict as miners have sometimes mined in areas that are problematic in terms of them being game reserves, and are pursuing some energy projects that are definitely detrimental to the communities. So the problems are there, and the people know them a lot. People talk about them a lot. But perhaps what's now needed is how do you get it out there in a way that is overwhelming, in a way that speaks truth to power, yes, but that shows that this is really something that's happening in a way that's taken seriously, in a way that's taken formally. And I think that's the challenge now. How do we translate street talk of common problems into a serious formal business? And I like Marco's presentation in that it attempts to highlight ways in which people can actually do that. So some of the ways that I think remain very, very, very important for us to take note of, especially of late, we notice there's been on social media several times elements of some citizen journalism. Yes, it could be dismissed by some as something that doesn't make sense, but you find the recent explosion in an area in Zimbabwe called Dinde, where there was an explosion. Anyone who saw that video of the explosion was outraged, and even the evidence that can be submitted in such a raw format, because the thing is captured in real time. But still, how do you relate that kind of raw and unprocessed data into information that's actually usable at a multinational forum? So this remains again another very very, very serious challenge. Perhaps one way communities would be to work with CSOs, or in the reverse for CSOs to work with the communities, because I think this could actually very much help most of the communities, because communities sometimes suffer in silence, and even when they try to speak out, they don't really know which platforms to address and how to address. So the CSOs are like Zela, who are conscious of processes and things that have to happen, can help the community understand its rights and sometimes the obligations of investors that are operating within their area. So this could mean several things. This involvement of CSOs. It could mean civic education for the communities, that the communities need to be made aware in terms of what the law says, but also in terms of the avenues that are open to them in terms of remedial action and prevention measures, and even ways of getting out their story to the rest of the world. So it's something that could be done. They could also be made to collaborate with the parliamentarians. So last week we had a meeting with some parliamentarians, and most of them showed goodwill, which means that there is room to link communities and their parliamentarians to actually negotiate and discuss certain problems that are affecting the communities. But one thing that still stands out for me is how do you encourage the communities to be more participatory in the construction of or in the development of EIAs, environmental impact assessments, where sometimes communities do not really know what's the process like. They also do not know the cost-benefit analysis in the processes. And this is a situation where I find it could be very useful to have people with the know and also some capacity building for the communities in terms of what is really happening within when environmental impact assessment is being made. What is expected of the community? So it's important to have some education around that. Encourage, yes, the participation, but also to encourage their informed participation in terms of what they can do. But also another thing is that this education of communities, it could also help communities demand and insist on full contract disclosures, because most of the times people are just talking, at least from the respondents that we spoke about during the various interviews we conducted. You find there is even a lack of certainty in terms of who is doing what in their communities. They just know it's an investor that is in their community, but what are they mining? What are their names? What is the stakeholder structure of their company, the shareholder structure? They are not even aware of that. So people could actually insist. This could be from the traditional heads and even to the rural district council. And also, you just keep going up the ladder. But I think at the community level, there are structures that can be used to actually trigger this. So what could also be done is, it could be the community could initiate the establishment of a CBO, of a community-based organization, focused on the particular, either it's a project, whether in energy, in mining, or whatsoever in the investment area is happening in the area. A community could actually trigger a community-based organization that could focus on the particular or that particular issue in terms of advocacy, recording, keeping data about what's happening in that regarding that particular investment. Because also what happens a lot with community organizations is that sometimes with unstructured community organization is that there's a lot of mobility. Some people believe in, some people will be coming in. But if the community could establish some sort of structure in which everyone can participate, because also there's a risk of the people in the structure being captured by the investors. So it should be a structure that remains community oriented in many ways. Maybe I'll end on a very, very important point, which I think will be very important in the point of presenting evidence, which I said is so important in this process, in driving the UPR process, because what's needed eventually is evidence. Can you provide evidence that shames political strategies and political compromises and collusions? How do you beat those things? It's an understanding. It's a way of it's almost a philosophical way again of approaching things. But I think it's a very democratic way. You need to involve the communities as much as possible, whether it's a CSO or whether it's a community-based organization. It needs to involve the communities as much as possible. So in that, I'll talk about an idea of self-presentation. Well, if it's CSOs that are involved, if it's a CBO that's involved, it should try by all means to have the community or the communities represent themselves. Let them be the proof. If you can at least present them the thing as they experience. So First, it could be either allowing them to come and present, to make submissions at key forums. Let's say when the report is the national report is being developed, particular members of the community could actually be brought forward and present in their own words some part of the evidence in terms of what's happening. Yeah. So the issue of own words is also something to keep in mind, because sometimes as civil society actors, as academics, etc., we tend to use a certain language that is professional, a language that is technical, that also sometimes glosses over the issue. But then when we allow ourselves to inhabit the language of the people that actually are experiencing the violation, we sort of expand the possibilities of understanding and also the possibilities of making an effect on the investors, and then some significant adjustments could be made. So I think that issue of self-presentation is a message both to the communities, to CBOs and to CSOs, and even to parliamentarians and the government at large. Which evidence are we going to rely on? Yes, reports can play their part, but I think it's important continuously to find a way within those reports to continuously reference the experiences, to capture the nuances of community experiences. So I think with that, I will stop here. Most of the things have been spoken by the previous presenters, but I think this issue of evidence and perceptions is something that is very vital for communities if impact is to be made, and for violations in the area of natural resource governance in Zimbabwe is to be improved. Nyarai, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Prolific Matarose, for that presentation, really delving down in terms of how we can get the actual community voices to be present and to speak and have a voice when we have processes around, drafting of the actual report itself, when civil society is influencing various processes. And in terms of documentation, how are we doing that so that the reality of the situation is clear when it comes to environmental, socioeconomic, and cultural rights violations by Chinese, investors in the mining and energy sectors? And I think you really also, flagged issues in the energy sector. And, there is now a question there from Pride in the chat that are we going green, as a country? And, when we look at, China, recent pronouncement around, reducing or even, eliminating investment in non-renewable energy in the outside their jurisdiction. And we have Alessandra also coming in to say that, China already has extraterritorial laws like their national security law, but it is very pro-China and anti the individual, anti-criticism, not sure if they would pass, laws that would put pressure on their own in terms of the Chinese companies there. So a very interesting, conversation there and presentation. Can we take questions? Yes, Alessandra.
I actually wanted to give, if you look at Potar Muzamba's comment about the EIA process, that sounds like a fantastic question.
Thanks, Alessandra, for flagging that. Potar indicates that it's a question directed to Dr. Mataruse. And it reads, you mentioned the issue of community participating in the environmental impact assessment process. It is very critical, but the Zimbabwean process of developing the environmental impact assessment report is marred by a lack of transparency on the part of government and corporations. There is an example there of a community in Binga where there is construction of the Gwai Shangani Dam, and the community participation in the process, has been a perfunctory process, and that the final document is being kept under lock and key, and it is not being released in violation of communities' access rights to access that particular information. So what can be done by the community in such an instance? Yes, I think very key point there. How can the community hold the corporations accountable in the absence of, access to information and transparency on the part of both the government and the corporations? Anybody else? Okay, let me allow Dr. Mataruse to respond to that.
Thank you, Nyari. I think you also highlighted some issue. Someone asked about the question, are we going green because of the Chinese premier's announcements? I don't think we are yet going green because he announced that. Also because the statement itself is hazy. What does it mean? It's not clear what the statement means, because this is progress, but it's the low-hanging fruit in terms of China's, serious reliance on coal within China and outside China. Already it has relied on funding coal. So if it were to stop funding coal, it would obviously have a lot of repercussions, diplomatic repercussions in terms of its other investments in these countries. So I don't think we are as yet going green that fast if we're going to go green. I think the EIAs in our case are a really big challenge because the laws are very clear, but the political setup within our country, in the political reality, is very much toxic. And I think this is where it's probably very important for communities to be linked as much as possible to various actors. I could say parliamentarians, but it seems like during focus group discussions and interviews with communities, most of the times we find the parliamentarians are also linked to the investors in terms of colluding to hide information from the community. I think one avenue that remains very, very, very strong, and that's been used in Zimbabwe, is courts, where communities have taken these investors to courts and demanded certain things be done. But you find it's again very, very, very difficult. I was saying recently at some meeting we had that some of the information is even hidden from Parliament itself. Parliament does not even access the information. But I think what's important is for us to keep talking about what should be done right, to keep insisting on the things that are right to be done. It's probably currently very difficult in many circumstances. But let me take, for example, the Dinde area, that explosion in the community in Dinde. It's something that really brings aspects of what was the obligation of the investor in terms of the EIA, and organizations and responsible officials should be taken to task to explain and to clarify in terms of these things. I've seen that there's been a statement that the Chinese investor has been moved to some other place, but just the movement of an investor to another place without due diligence in looking at what was supposed to be done, were there penalties that are supposed to be effected, what was supposed to be done. And I think that's a bigger issue that is bigger than communities. But this is where it's important to keep highlighting some of these things, because when they are highlighted, if the law says there should be an EIA, I think that could be a ground for some action of some sort. It could be a ground even for approaching some of these
some of these investors. The onus is not on a foreign investor, including the Chinese investors, to do the responsible thing, or for us to be investigating Chinese laws. Because when you look at Chinese laws, investment laws, they are very so rigid in terms of environmental protection. Because if you know the history of China, in the 1980s, they opened up. They were looking for any kind of investors, and to find the carbon emissions from the US. So those companies relocated to China, and they did their worst in China. But now the situation is reversed. China is also coming out and is doing its worst to these other countries.
So I am now going to allow our speakers once again to just share any final words. I know, Marco spoke strongly around, development of a national action plan on business and human rights to guide Chinese stakeholders at different levels. In Zimbabwe, again, this is part of the work that Zela has been doing with the Zimbabwe Human Rights Commission to just push for the development of a particular national action plan on business and human rights by the government. To guide, investors, including the Chinese, on how to integrate human rights into economic development policies. This is a key point that Marco raised in his initial presentation. And Marco, maybe you can just share a final word, having heard from, the contributions more around the context of Zimbabwe made by Dr. Tabora, the contributions from, Dr. Mataruse, and from everyone here. Can you share, the last takeaway points, Marco?
Well, I'm very happy with this journey. I learned a lot, and I see that the interventions of our colleagues were extremely into depth, which leave an idea of starting to have a joint work being carried out. We are very open in Latin America to have more close dialogue with you, to talk about possibilities of collaboration with you in your work vis-a-vis China, to have a coalition to work together. I will pay attention to the contacts, and I have to say that I'm available for you to write an email whenever. And once again, I would like to thank the invitation, thank Pedro.
Thank you very much, Marco, for that. Collaboration, a key issue, again, recommendations, the impact that we are going to make depends on collaboration at all levels, local, regional, and international. And thank you for reiterating that the door is open for us to continue engaging beyond this dialogue meeting. I am now going to move to Dr. Tabora. I see he is now back. Dr. Tabora, reflection points, any key, final takeaways?
Thank you, Nyaradzo. I don't have much to say, but just to say that, first of all, I apologize. I had a network breach, but it was resolved a little bit later, but I was done with my presentation, basically. I just want to reiterate that the UPR system is a very good system, and it has that scope for non-state actors to always work with the purpose of, with the interest of enforcing accountability of the government. So I think the CSOs must explore the UPR system very much. They are doing that, but they must also consider doing that as a network or as a network of non-state actors, a network made by other local actors, also regional actors that have got similar issues in Zimbabwe. So that's my point that I wanted to hammer on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Tabora. Dr. Mataruse making the point that, there is no better way to make the problems visible than to amplify, community voices and to create spaces where the communities can share, their experiences directly. Any final last comments, Dr. Mataruse?
I think the point to note is that it's the communities. The evidence lies with the communities. So it's the communities that should be probably more listened to, more organized. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we have come to the end of yet another PEDNAG dialogue meeting that was hosted by the Zimbabwe Environmental Law Association and the Africa Institute for Environmental Law. We are definitely going to really take up these recommendations as part of the work that we are doing in terms of the Chinese investments and to really look deeply around, making sure that the recommendations from, the UPR process actually turn out to positive changes for the communities that are affected by Chinese investments in Zimbabwe in the mining and energy sectors. Let me take this opportunity to thank our panelists, Marco, James, and Prolific for taking time out of their busy schedule to be with us today. Let me also take the opportunity to thank all of our participants from all over and our partners, the ISLP that we are working with, and all the others that have supported us today. Let's keep the conversation alive and continue to collaborate in these and other spaces. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, good evening.
That was one of the political economy dialogues on natural resource governance, PEDNAG, brought to you by the Zimbabwe Environmental Law Association, ZELA, and the Africa Institute for Environmental Law. For more information, please check out www.zela.org or follow the African Institute for Environmental Law on Twitter at AIEL_info. Stay tuned for more episodes.